Welcome to the Overcoming Mediocrity podcast, where today's top influencers and entrepreneurs on the rise share empowering stories and ninja tips to become the fuel that ignites a positive change in your life. Our guests don't simply coast through life. They don't let difficult situations stop them. They set big goals, keep their eyes on the prize, and they're joining us today to share insider secrets you can use right now to step into your power and live your purpose. Now, here's your host, Christy Ruffino.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Overcoming Mediocrity podcast. I am Christy Ruffino, the host of the show, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to the guest today, my guest and new friend, Mynders Glover. Welcome, Mynders.
Well, thank you, Christy. I'm so happy to be here.
So, Mynders and I met in a joint venture community. I've met so many amazing people in there. And just recently, he gave a presentation to us all about product launches. And I was fascinated. I took a bunch of notes. I'm in the process of doing a product launch myself. And I'm going to have a conversation with Mynders after this about how he could possibly support you or support me. But I know when you're listening to this podcast, you may have a few questions about how he could possibly support you. And so I want to let you know right off the bat that all of his contact information is going to be in the show notes below. And we're going to talk a lot today. But before we do that, I want to share a little bit about who Mynders is by reading his professional bio, because it helps kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about and his credentials. So Mynders Glover is a product launch consultant who helps authors, coaches, and professional service providers increase cash flow in their business. He helps them implement a repeatable product launch system to market their digital products and services. In his 8 years as a launch manager and consultant, Mynders has perfected his systems-oriented approach designed to overcome the fear of launching, often resulting from the false perception of needing to take huge risks of time and money. So I can completely relate with that, Mynders.
Great.
So welcome. And I want to start off with you sharing a little bit about your why. Like, there is a reason that you got into this area. And what is the story that you can share that will allow the audience to really realize why you're so passionate about this?
I would be happy to share my story. And there are two primary influences that really led to the whole idea of launch from where you are. And we'll explain, a little bit later what that whole notion is about. But my online journey started, Christy, back in 2008. And when I first came on, I was transitioning out of a disastrous result from being a real estate developer, or near disastrous result. You might recall 2008 was when that market turned upside down. So I jumped into the online world. And I had an early influence in someone that you and the audience probably knows about, Jeff Walker, who created the whole product launch space and methodology. And that methodology is typically like a 6-month planning period with a lot of moving pieces in a particular format. So I was an early student and a friend. Jeff was a neighbor of mine 5 doors down for 7 years. But when I entered, I first wanted to introduce my own product and service. And what happened was literally, I didn't do my homework on my positioning. I thought I could offer my expertise of business building shortcuts to everybody online. Well, that's a heck of a hard market, to get some distinction and credibility when you're trying to market to everybody in the online space, right? So I fumbled around literally for almost 2 years, just trying to make some traction. And then fortunately, in a course that I had created with my wife at the time, one of my JV partners ended up having a big launch come up, and he invited me in 2013 to be a project manager on that launch. So that's one of my skills, as we were talking about before this call, that a launch has a lot of moving pieces. So you've got to be able to project manage it. And that's one of my areas of expertise. So I went on this launch that had been in months in development, but they called me in with 3 weeks before the registration opened.
Oh boy.
And it literally was like herding cats, right? You had web developers who would go and hide during the day because they were night owls. You had the marketing people who didn't know how to speak to them. You had nobody organized. And so I went to each of these stakeholders, found out what they were doing, harnessed it, and we pulled together, an incredible launch that did high six figures, before it was all said and done, but the lesson that I learned from that was, as I was watching people literally say goodbye to their families in the last few weeks before the launch, we're behind the gun. We set an arbitrary date, and now we're pushing heaven and earth to try to meet that date. And then, working nights and weekends. And I said, you know what, there's got to be a better way. Why do we create it in such a way that the launcher never wants to launch again, and the team threatens to quit if they ever launch again, and the spouse or significant other says, I'm leaving you if you ever launch again? It's a flawed model, and so I set out on a journey to find out how I could help people, bridge that gap from where they are to having, a series of launches easily within their comfort zone so that they could then create a long-term business. So those two influences, one, when I couldn't find my way, I needed my own service, which I didn't envision yet back in 2008. And then starting in 2013, when I started working with clients on product launches as launch manager, and realizing that we had to reinvent the culture so it could be sustainable.
Yeah, that's the key is sustainability, because we can work really hard to get something done. But if we have to start from scratch and work hard again, it's overwhelming. And I know I kind of liken this a lot to a woman having a child. You go through that whole process, and first you're super excited, then it gets a little bit stressful towards the end, and then with the launch it's crazy stressful. And then afterwards you're like, oh, I'm never doing this again. But then later, once you start serving your clients, you realize that, yes, this was an important thing. I need to keep doing this, but to do it in a way that's not as painful would be really nice.
Yes, and absolutely. And we look and we see this goal that we have, and we contemplate doing something with the preconceived notion that we have, what it is to launch a product in a big way and make revenue. And it's like looking across the Grand Canyon, and we say, you know what, the risks are too great. I just can't go there. So how about if we launch within your realm of acceptance, have you reached just a little bit, and then before you know it, with several smaller launches, you cross that Grand Canyon on your terms.
Yes, I like that. I like taking baby steps, because that doesn't make me freeze. It keeps me moving forward. And I believe that this is really important. So that is a great story. That's neat how you kind of got into this, and that you were neighbors with Jeff Walker. That's kind of crazy. But you learned from the best. And now that's great. I feel that you're teaching that to people, not only helping them on a one-on-one basis, but with this great program that you have. And I know you've got a great gift that you're going to share with our audience towards the end of the interview today. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere, because I want to make sure everybody that's there, I'm not talking to you, Mynders, I'm talking to the audience. We don't want them to tune out. We want them to stay with us, because we're going to share about what that is. So if you don't mind hanging tight, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back, and you will, do you mind sharing some of your tips around doing a product launch?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to.
Perfect. Awesome. We'll be right back. Anyone can network. Yes, anyone can meet people and collect business cards. However, not everyone knows how to network in a way that will provide them with a regular supply of new and repeat business. Treasured Tribes is more than just another networking book. This revolutionary book will show you how to adapt different strategies with your networking efforts that will get you better results than ever before. To grab your copy, visit www.treasuredtribes.com. Well, welcome back, everybody, to today's episode with Mynders Glover, when we're talking about product launches. And I shared, actually before we started recording, that I am in the middle of a product launch, and it is crazy. I have lots of moving parts. I keep pushing my dates back, and it just becomes one of these like things that were bigger than I thought it was at first. Because at first I thought, oh, no problem, I can do this, because I see other people doing it. It looks easy from my perspective when they're doing it. But when I have to do it, I have to think about emails and social media and like a ramp up and a cart open and all these terms that I didn't know really anything about, but they're all so important. So how can you kind of advise not only me, but our audience that in relationships to having a really streamlined product launch from where we are right now?
Great, Christy. That's a wonderful question. So let me set this up for you. The idea is there's a fundamental principle which we see in life time and time again, and that is that you get further ahead by taking one well-reasoned step at a time, evaluating, taking the next step, evaluating, and before long, you've built a strong business. And this certainly applies for anything that you do, and the key here is consistency. So we've all heard the message, be consistent in your social media posting and so forth. Well, same way with building your business and in doing, product launches. The alternative is to not have a plan, not know exactly where you're going, have lofty goals that may not be substantiated in terms of foundation, and then you try something, you have an unrealistic expectation of the result, so you shelve it, and like the hare in the story of the tortoise and the hare, you're going sideways. I call this sideways marketing. And so people say, wow, I need to get that launch going right now. Otherwise, I'm going to be behind. And I say, you know what? I'd rather you delay that launch for a month or two, build the foundation of your structure and fit it into your life and lifestyle and other commitments, and then start a path where you can do more launches, incrementally building on the prior one. And so quickly, you, the tortoise, are going to leave the hare in the dust and get much further ahead. So that's the foundational issue. The second piece around launch from where you are is the concept that how launches naturally evolve. And that is that you typically, whether you're experienced or you're brand new, you have a new concept that's untested. And so you typically are going to do a beta launch. And that means you're going to invite, a few close friends or people who it might be right for. And you're going to uh, market it in the barest of means, maybe putting posts on Facebook, maybe calling up some people, and you might have 5 people in your beta launch. And so you test the idea, you refine it, and it's got legs, you get good comment and initial testimonials. Then you go into the internal launch phase where you're going to your list or you're promoting it more on Facebook, or even doing ads. And this is an important component because you're doing 2 things. One, you're refining the content of your program, and 2, you're refining the conversion so that before you go and ask JV partners to promote it, you know that the content is solid and that when people get to your sales page, that they're converting. Because the worst thing that you can do is to start right out of the bat, line up a bunch of JV partners and fail in either of those 2 areas. So if you think about that progression from a beta to an internal to JV, that lends itself to launching from where you are. So if you're starting, you're at the beginning phases of that. If you're more advanced, then it's about refining the JV approaches, and deeper forms of advertising and social media influence.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I know for me, one of the other layers I'm trying to incorporate is that JV commission process and how to track those affiliate links and making sure that I'm paying out with it all. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of silly for me to even be worrying about that until I've already ran my program at least once, refined it, and then repeat it again when I know the outcome will be greater and better for my customers. So yeah, that's a great point.
Awesome. So, in continuing with the idea of launching from where you are, I have 4 fundamental pillars that are around my work, and that I also recommend that people use in building their business. And I'll explain those 4 pillars, but it basically begins, Christy, with a roadmap, a launch roadmap. And I want to make that available to anyone listening to this podcast who would like to have that. And I know that you've got the links in the show notes where people can grab it. But essentially, if you can imagine a visual roadmap, with a roadmap, like a road that curves several times with stopping points along the roadmap. And there are 3 primary paths in building your online business. The first one is creating a launch plan that is not only good for your upcoming launch, whether it's your first or subsequent, but it's also the launch plan for your entire business, because it forms a roadmap to build your business. And in that planning phase, what you're doing is you're aligning the goals that you have and getting real about those goals, not pie in the sky, but achievable and that you're willing to commit to. And then working a plan where you can achieve those through aligning your value-driven purpose, your expertise, with the target audience that you want to deliver that through. And once we get there, we look at the various launch models, of which there are 4 primary launch models, of which a lot of funnels will fit into. And then we show you how to create a financial forecast. So you have these goals. How long will it take me to reach it if I know what my product is and how I'm willing to offer it, through a launch model? And so the end result of that planning phase, Christy, is that people no longer have a nebulous thought about what success looks like for them. They actually have a plan, that shows in each month how their revenue can grow from a very conservative, growth projection tailored to them. So that's the level one. And when I help people get through that, I bring them through a 2-day program that I have that gets to that end result. It's a low-cost 2-day program. But the idea is then someone can then implement that plan and do a launch themselves, or with my team. And the idea is that phase 2 is doing an individual launch. And I love, of the 4 models that I mentioned, I love what I call the momentum launch that combines too many MINI models together. And that's a challenge funnel with selling your big program at the end of your challenge via a webinar. And so whatever model you choose, at the end of that row 2 on the roadmap, as you rounded the curve going into the home stretch, block 3 is where you look at how that launch was for you. You look at the metrics. Are you ready now to go to the JV stage? Was there something off? Your audience just didn't like your big product. Then you change the launch model, to reach that. Did it not fit you like a glove? And so then you refine and then you launch again. So that's the roadmap that I fully explain, in that gift that people can access. And any thoughts on that, Christy, before I wrap the 4 pillars around that?
No, I think that's great. And I think one of the key pieces to that is having that forecastable revenue. You're not just out there trying things and seeing what happens. You're able to execute it with a plan that will allow you to forecast that you're going to have these many dollars at the end of this piece of the process. And then you keep refining it so that number is going to go up. But it's more of it's stability, which I think as an entrepreneur, that's really important to have.
Totally. So if you know that if you stick with your plan, you will be successful, then you're less likely to go chasing shiny objects along the way.
What? I don't know anything about that.
Well, we all unfortunately have experienced that.
Yeah. So far, so good. We've got the 3 pillars, and I know you said you had one more, right?
Well, the framework was, 3 rows of the roadmap that people.
Oh, got it.
But the overlying pillars are this. Number 1, that your best path to success is by sequencing one product launch after another to reach your goal. Now, what is a product launch? It's nothing more than a revenue producing event. So if you focus on what's the next way for me to create revenue, and you're adding layers as you go along, then you use, the tools and social media to support your launch. Then you evaluate, you've grown a little bit more, you can take on a little bit more, and you do it again. So that's pillar number 1, is build your business by committing to product launches, one after another.
Mm-hmm.
Second, I mentioned in that one is that you're focusing on the revenue producing event rather than the process. So whether it's ads or it's social media or SEO or whatever, that each launch and each launch model allows you to add greater components, to it. So you don't have to focus on the social media, it'll come to you.
Love that.
And then the next component is the whole continuity and continuing with your program month after month at whatever frequency you want to build in launches. And forget anybody else. This is about tailor making it to you, because the tortoise always wins. If you stick with your plan, you will get there. And then finally, the last one is that if you make it okay to get a small result on your first launch, several $1,000s, And you've seen your plan where several $1,000s can quickly snowball after a few launches, and you make that okay. You take the pressure off. So as you were mentioning, Christy, trying to figure out funnels and social media and email sequences and JV links, you do what you can absorb in your time, in your budget, and your lifestyle, and your awareness now, knowing that soon you'll have another launch and you add another layer to it. And the reason to do that, not only is for your sanity, but for the sanity of your family and your team, so that
Yes.
they stick around and work with you.
That's important, especially if we want to keep doing this, because yes, we don't want them to abandon the ship.
That's right.
So I do have one question. I've been hearing a lot about having an evergreen launch. What does that mean? Because that doesn't even make sense to me, is to have an evergreen launch.
Well, that's a great question. And an evergreen launch just means that it's the gift that keeps on giving, so to speak. So if you think about, you do a lead gen where people opt in and get, a PDF report or a video or whatever, that's an evergreen uh, item, in that as long as that page is on the internet, people can grab it. But typically, when we think in terms of an evergreen type of launch, we're talking from a sales standpoint. It's when you record the content once and then you set it up so that it can show over and over again. So let me give you two different examples of that. One is, let's say you do that program that we talked about. Let's say you have a coaching program and you do it as a beta to some friends and a handful of people, and you record it and you record the segments. Well, some of those are strong and will stand on their own. But then as you do it again in several internal launches, it gets even better. And finally, you can say, wow, I can put this into a membership area so that I don't have to do this workshop over and over again live. So there is an evergreen program where you can sell it, and the content exists in a membership area with pre-recorded videos. Now, another example of that, and where we hear it a lot, is in evergreen webinars. So let's say you do a webinar to sell your big program, and initially you do it live, and once you really perfect it and hit people, in their emotional heartstrings, giving them what they want, and you've perfected the conversions, then you might decide to do it, record it once, and then throw it up on something like Webinar Jam, pre-recorded webinar software, where when people go to that site, they can pick one of two times to see the pre-recorded webinar. So then it's evergreen. You no longer have to spend your time doing that.
Perfect. Okay, so that is really good. So I really want to thank you for sharing so much. This really kind of created a clarity for me on a couple areas. So that was really good. So I'm assuming that many of our audience had aha moments as well, because you really shared some great tips. And you have a great gift that you're sharing with us. And I know you talked about it a little bit, the roadmap, but we will go ahead and leave the link in the show notes. It is your Momentum Launch Roadmap. And you seeded about it, you talked about it, but do you want to give a little more explanation about it before we end?
I sure would. Thank you, Kristen. So the roadmap, which is this diagram that I referred to earlier, and then the report built around every step along the journey. And there's like 11 stopping points, if you can think of it as that winding road with bus stops along the way. So it explains what each of those stops are and gives you a perspective so that you can start to implement this into your own business. And so it's just simply, it's planning so that you can launch, running a launch, and then evaluating the results and adjusting it so that you can continue to launch to reach your goals.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for sharing that. I also want to thank you because in our community, you shared a great tool. It was a spreadsheet that you just put in the data and it like kind of gives you a lot of answers. So I know if somebody wanted to work with you, you'd be able to share that with them as well. But for me, that was helpful. That was also helpful for me. Again, thanks for joining us today, Mynders, and it was a lot of fun. I hope you had some fun with me, and I would love to invite you back again one day.
Oh, please, anytime. I'd love to speak to your audience, Christy.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for listening. I know I learned so much. I hope you learned a lot from Mynders. And if you're like me, I learn better when I teach. So share a few tips with somebody you know, as well as share our podcast with others as well, because the more people we listen, the more wisdom we're able to share out in the world. So thanks for joining us today and have a great day. And thanks again, Mynders.
Thank you. And bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Overcoming Mediocrity podcast, where we believe that everyone can have the business and life of their dreams once they've learned the art of mastering their story. Mastering our stories is the key to everything we want in life. Our stories can either hold us back or they can propel us to new heights. We can choose. You can choose. Choose to overcome mediocrity with us. Let's achieve greatness together. To learn more, visit www.overcomingmediocrity.org. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.